The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colorado plains as the McKenzie wagon train wound its way through the rocky pass. Sarah McKenzie adjusted her bonnet against the growing heat, watching her husband Thomas guide their oxen along the rutted trail ahead. 23 wagons stretched behind them, carrying hopes and dreams toward the promised fertile valleys beyond the mountains. "Another 2 days and we'll reach Fort Collins," Thomas called over the creaking wheels and lowing cattle. His weathered hands gripped the reins with the confidence of a man who'd successfully brought his family through 6 months of hardship on the Oregon Trail. Sarah nodded, bouncing their infant daughter Mary on her lap while scanning the ridgeline that hemmed them in on both sides. Something felt wrong. The usual chatter from the other wagons had died away, replaced by an uneasy quiet that made her skin crawl. From his position on the eastern ridge, Running Wolf watched the white settlers' procession with growing unease. His people called this sacred ground, the place where his grandfather's bones rested beneath the red earth. The cavalry had driven them from their village 3 weeks ago, scattering families like leaves before a winter storm. Now these wagons rolled across burial grounds, as if they owned the very stones. His Mustang, Stormwalker, stamped restlessly beneath him, sensing his rider's tension. Running Wolf's jaw tightened as he remembered the smoking ruins of their camp, the bodies of elders who'd never harmed anyone. His younger brother Little Bear and 8 other warriors had ridden out seeking vengeance. Running Wolf had tried to stop them, arguing that innocent blood would only bring more death, but grief and rage had made them deaf to wisdom. The attack came without warning. War whoops split the morning air as Little Bear's band erupted from concealment among the rocks. Arrows whistled down into the wagon train while panicked oxen bellowed and reared in their traces. Thomas McKenzie shouted commands, whipping his team toward a defensive circle, but an arrow caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him from the wagon seat. "Thomas!" Sarah screamed, grabbing desperately for the reins as her husband fell. Their wagon lurched sideways, wheels catching on loose stone, and suddenly the world tilted as they crashed onto their side. Captain Morrison's cavalry patrol heard the gunfire from 3 miles away and rode hard toward the sound. But in the chaos of dust and smoke, with wagons scattered and people running, the soldiers couldn't distinguish between attackers and settlers. Their carbines cracked in response to any movement, adding to the deadly crossfire. Sarah found herself pinned beneath the overturned wagon, Mary crying in her arms, while bullets and arrows whistled overhead from both directions. Thomas lay 20 feet away, blood spreading across his shirt, trying to crawl toward them despite his wound. "Stay down," he gasped, but even as he spoke, a cavalry bullet kicked dirt into his face. The soldiers had mistaken his movement for hostility. Running Wolf saw it all from his vantage point, the woman trapped with her child, the wounded man crawling through gunfire, the indiscriminate shooting from both sides. His honor would not permit him to watch innocents die, even if they were white. But riding into that chaos meant certain death. Stormwalker snorted and tossed his head as if reading his master's thoughts. The Mustang had carried him through many dangers. Would he carry him through one more? "What are you thinking, brother?" Running Wolf turned to see his cousin Greyhawk approaching on foot, having left his own horse below the ridge. The older warrior's face was grave with concern. "They're killing everyone down there," Running Wolf said, gesturing toward the trapped family. "Even the cavalry shoots at shadows." "It's not our fight anymore," Greyhawk replied. "Little Bear chose this path. Let him face the consequences." But Running Wolf was already checking his weapons, lance, knife, and tomahawk, no bow. He would need his hands free for riding. "Sometimes honor demands we choose a different path than our blood brothers." Before Greyhawk could protest, Running Wolf touched his heels to Stormwalker's flanks and plunged down the rocky slope toward the killing ground below. The Mustang's hooves struck sparks from stone as they descended, and Sarah looked up through the dust to see something that defied belief. A Lakota warrior charging straight toward her through a rain of arrows and bullets, his face set with fierce determination. Stormwalker's muscles bunched and released as he navigated the treacherous descent, his hooves finding purchase on loose shale that would have sent lesser horses tumbling. Running Wolf pressed low against his mount's neck, feeling arrows whistle past his ear as Little Bear's warriors spotted his approach. "Traitor!" one of them shouted in Lakota. "You ride with the whites now?" Running Wolf didn't answer. Words were useless in the fury of battle. An arrow from his own people grazed Stormwalker's flank, but the Mustang never faltered, trained by years of buffalo hunts and cavalry skirmishes to ignore pain when his rider demanded courage. Sarah watched in stunned disbelief as the warrior bore down on her position. Every instinct screamed that this man meant death, that the savage painted face and raised tomahawk spelled doom for her and Mary. But something in his eyes, glimpsed for just an instant through the chaos, spoke not of bloodlust, but of desperate purpose. "No, please!" she cried, clutching her baby tighter as Running Wolf pulled Stormwalker to a sliding halt beside the overturned wagon. "Don't hurt us!" Instead of striking, Running Wolf vaulted from his horse and began examining the heavy wagon pinning her legs. His dark eyes assessed the situation with the quick intelligence of a man accustomed to life-or-death decisions. Sarah's left leg was trapped beneath the wagon's side panel, but not crushed. The baby appeared unhurt, though screaming with terror. You're not going to kill us?" Sarah whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Running Wolf's gaze met hers briefly. "No kill," he said in broken English, then turned his attention to the wagon. He'd learned some of the white man's tongue from traders, though he rarely had cause to use it. A cavalry bullet splintered wood inches from his head, and Running Wolf realized their position was exposed to fire from 3 directions. He needed to move them, but first he had to free the woman. Bracing his shoulder against the wagon's undercarriage, he heaved upward with all his strength. "Pull!" he commanded Sarah, sweat beading on his forehead as the wagon lifted slightly. Sarah yanked her leg free just as Running Wolf's strength gave out and the wagon crashed back down. Pain shot through her ankle, twisted but not broken. She could walk if she had to. "Thomas!" she called to her husband, who had managed to crawl closer despite his shoulder wound. Blood loss was making him weak, his face pale as winter snow. "Sarah, take Mary and run," Thomas gasped. Don't trust him." But even as Thomas spoke, more arrows rained down from Little Bear's position. Running Wolf threw himself over Sarah and the baby, his broad back taking an arrow meant for them. He grunted with pain, but didn't cry out, rolling to his feet and snapping off the shaft that protruded from his shoulder blade. Captain Morrison's cavalry had finally sorted friend from foe and were returning disciplined fire at the ridgeline positions. Their carbines cracked in rhythm, driving Little Bear's warriors back from their exposed perches. But the damage was done. 3 wagons burned, 7 settlers dead, and panic spreading through the remaining families. "We must move," Running Wolf told Sarah, his English stilted but urgent. "More warriors come. You, husband, baby, all die if stay." Sarah looked at Thomas, who was losing consciousness from blood loss. They couldn't move him far, and she couldn't carry both him and Mary while fleeing on a twisted ankle. The impossible choice hung before her like a blade. "I can't leave him," she said, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Running Wolf studied the wounded man with a warrior's eye. The shoulder wound was serious but not immediately fatal if properly tended. But staying here meant certain death when Little Bear regrouped for another attack. Making a decision that would mark him as an enemy to his own people, Running Wolf whistled sharply. Stormwalker trotted over, and the warrior began fashioning a travois from broken wagon pieces and leather harness. His movements were swift and sure, born of experience moving wounded comrades across hostile terrain. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, watching in amazement as he worked. "Save all," Running Wolf replied simply. "Honor demands." The sound of approaching hooves echoed from the north, more cavalry, or perhaps Little Bear's reinforcements. Time was running out. Running Wolf lifted the semi-conscious Thomas as gently as his strength allowed and secured him to the makeshift travois. The white man was heavier than any brave Running Wolf had ever carried, but Stormwalker was strong. "You ride," he told Sarah, gesturing to his horse's back. "Hold, baby. I lead." Sarah hesitated for just a moment, looking into the face of this enemy who had become her salvation. Behind them, gunfire was picking up again as the two forces clashed. Ahead lay uncertain refuge, guided by a man whose people considered her family invaders worthy of death. But Mary was crying, Thomas was dying, and this painted warrior had already taken arrows meant for them. "Thank you," she whispered as Running Wolf helped her onto Stormwalker's broad back. He nodded once, took the horse's bridle, and began leading them away from the battlefield toward a future none of them could predict. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Running Wolf led Stormwalker through a maze of red rock canyons, following game trails known only to his people. Behind them, the sounds of battle had faded to an ominous silence, broken only by the steady clip of hooves on stone and Thomas's labored breathing from the travois. Sarah clutched Mary tighter, every muscle aching from the unfamiliar position astride the Mustang. The baby had finally stopped crying, exhausted by terror and heat. Sarah's twisted ankle throbbed with each step, but she bit back complaints. This man, this enemy who'd become their protector, was wounded too, an arrow shaft still protruding from his shoulder blade, yet he never slowed his steady pace. "Oh, where are you taking us?" she finally asked when they paused beside a small spring hidden among the rocks. Running Wolf knelt to examine Thomas's wound, his dark hands surprisingly gentle as he checked the makeshift bandage Sarah had torn from her petticoat. "Safe place," he answered in his careful English. "Old camp hidden." "Why?" The question burst from Sarah before she could stop it. "Why are you helping us? Your people, they already think me dead to them," Running Wolf said simply, not looking up from his patient. "Little Bear saw me ride to save whites. No forgiveness for that." Sarah watched his profile as he worked, noting the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his dark eyes. Everything she'd been taught said this man was a savage, a killer, an enemy of civilization. Yet his touch on her husband's wounds was careful as any doctor's, and he'd risked everything to save strangers. "Your shoulder," she said softly. "You need to let me look at it." Running Wolf shook his head. "Arrow stays until safe place. Pull out now. Bleed too much." A distant war cry echoed from the canyon behind them, answered by another from a different direction. Running Wolf's head snapped up, his body tensing like a wolf scenting danger. He rose quickly, water still dripping from his hands. "They follow," he said grimly. "Little Bear will not let me escape with whites. Is matter of honor now." Sarah felt cold despite the heat. "How many?" "6, maybe 8. Running Wolf was already checking Stormwalker's rigging, ensuring the travois was secure. "My brother leads them. He is, how you say, very angry." "Your brother?" Sarah stared at him in shock. "The warrior who attacked us is your brother." Little Bear, 16 summers, thinks war answers everything. Pain flickered across Running Wolf's features, not from his wound, but something deeper. Lost his woman to cavalry attack 3 weeks past. Now sees only blood. The war cries came again, closer this time. Running Wolf helped Sarah back onto Stormwalker, his movements urgent but still careful of her injured ankle. As they resumed their journey, climbing higher into the maze of canyons, Sarah found herself thinking about families torn apart by this endless cycle of violence. "What was her name?" she asked quietly. "Little Bear's woman." Running Wolf was silent for so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Dancing Doe carried his first child. Both died when soldiers burned our village. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. Little Bear was hunting, came home to ashes and graves. Sarah closed her eyes, imagining the young warrior's grief. If she came home to find Thomas and Mary murdered, what would she become? The thought made her hold her daughter closer. They climbed steadily through the afternoon, the rock walls around them growing higher and more narrow. The trail was barely wide enough for Stormwalker, and Sarah found herself looking down into dizzying drops that would mean certain death if the Mustang stumbled. But Running Wolf guided them with sure knowledge, his feet finding purchase on stone worn smooth by countless generations of his people. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, they emerged onto a hidden plateau, perhaps 2 acres in size, sheltered on 3 sides by sheer cliffs and accessible only by the narrow trail they'd just climbed. A small grove of stunted pines provided shade, and a spring bubbled up from the rocks to form a clear pool before disappearing underground again. "Here," Running Wolf said, finally allowing exhaustion to show in his voice. "They cannot bring horses up that trail. Must come on foot, single file, easy to defend." Sarah slid carefully from Stormwalker's back, her legs nearly buckling as her twisted ankle took her weight. Running Wolf caught her arm, steadying her until she found her balance. For a moment they stood close together, and Sarah caught the scent of sage and wood smoke that clung to his buckskins, so different from the familiar odors of her world. "Thank you," she whispered again, looking up into his dark eyes. There was pain there, and something else, a kind of terrible loneliness that made her heart ache unexpectedly. Running Wolf released her arm and stepped back, the moment broken by Thomas's groan as consciousness returned. They had reached temporary safety, but Sarah realized their real challenges were just beginning. How long could they hide here? What would happen when the cavalry came looking for survivors? And what future could there be for a Lakota warrior who'd chosen white strangers over the loyalty of his own blood? From far below came the sound of voices speaking in the Lakota tongue. Little Bear and his warriors had found the trail. The hunt was about to begin in earnest. The evening shadows lengthened across the hidden plateau as Sarah tended to Thomas beside the spring. His fever had broken, and though still weak from blood loss, he was conscious enough to drink water and understand their desperate situation. Running Wolf had positioned himself at the trail's edge, watching for pursuers, while Sarah finally insisted on treating his arrow wound. "This will hurt," she warned, examining the shaft that had penetrated deep between his shoulder blades. The arrowhead was buried in muscle, but had missed vital organs. She'd helped the town doctor back in Missouri enough times to understand basic wound care. "Pain is nothing new," Running Wolf replied, but his jaw tightened as Sarah began cutting away the buckskin around the wound with Thomas's knife. Her touch was gentle but sure, and he found himself wondering when a white woman had last shown such care for one of his people. The arrow came out clean after several agonizing minutes, bringing fresh blood but no fragments. Sarah pressed moss from the spring against the wound, an old frontier remedy she'd learned from her grandmother. Running Wolf endured it all in stoic silence, though sweat beaded his forehead. "There," Sarah said, binding the wound with strips torn from her dress. "It should heal clean if we can keep it from festering." "You have good hands for healing," Running Wolf observed, rolling his shoulder carefully to test the bandage. "Where did you learn?" "My father was a doctor before he died. I helped him sometimes." Sarah's voice softened with memory. "He always said illness and injury know no difference between friend and enemy." Running Wolf nodded thoughtfully. It was the kind of wisdom the elders of his tribe might speak, simple truths that cut through the hatred poisoning both their peoples. Their moment of quiet was shattered by a voice calling from below in the Lakota tongue, "Brother, I know you're up there." Little Bear had found them. Running Wolf moved to the cliff's edge, peering down at the narrow trail. His younger brother stood at the bottom, still mounted, 6 warriors flanking him on horseback. Their faces were painted for war, and Little Bear's eyes burned with the fervor of grief, transformed into rage. "Come down and face me," Little Bear shouted upward. "Explain why you choose white murderers over your own blood." Running Wolf cupped his hands and called back, "These people did not kill Dancing Doe. Their blood will not bring her back." "All whites are the same." Little Bear's voice cracked with emotion. "They take our land, kill our families, drive us like animals, and you protect them." Sarah moved to Running Wolf's side, Thomas leaning heavily on her shoulder. Despite his weakness, her husband's hand rested on his pistol, a gesture not lost on Running Wolf, who appreciated the man's courage, even while hoping it wouldn't be needed. "He's just a boy," Sarah whispered, looking down at Little Bear's young face twisted with pain and anger. "A boy who has seen too much death," Running Wolf replied sadly. "Grief has made him old, before his time." Little Bear was dismounting now, his warriors following suit. They began climbing the treacherous trail single file, weapons ready. Running Wolf knew every man among them. Warriors he'd fought beside, friends who'd shared his lodge and food. Now they came to kill him as a traitor. "I don't want to fight them," Running Wolf said quietly, checking his knife and tomahawk. His lance was still strapped to Stormwalker's saddle, but there was no room to use it effectively on the narrow plateau. "Maybe you won't have to," Thomas said weakly. His voice was stronger now, though his face remained pale. "Let me talk to the boy, man to man." "You cannot understand their words," Running Wolf protested. "I understand loss," Thomas replied simply. "I understand what it means to want revenge for family." The first warrior appeared at the top of the trail. Greyhawk, Running Wolf's cousin, his face grim with reluctance. Behind him came Little Bear, his young features set in lines too hard for his 16 years. The others followed. Crowfeather, Black Horse, Two Eagles, and Stone Bear, all good men driven by grief and tribal loyalty. Little Bear stepped forward, his hand on his knife hilt. "You shame our father's memory," he said to Running Wolf in Lakota. "You shame the spirits of all who died in the cavalry attack." "I honor them by refusing to spill innocent blood," Running Wolf replied in the same tongue. "This is not justice, it is madness." "Now speak English," Thomas interjected, surprising everyone. "If you're going to kill us, at least have the courage to look us in the eyes and tell us why." Little Bear's gaze shifted to the wounded white man, seeing perhaps for the first time not a faceless enemy, but a husband and father fighting to protect his family. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in the young warrior's eyes. "You killed Dancing Doe," Little Bear said in halting English, his voice breaking slightly. "Your soldiers burned our village, murdered women, children, elders who never raised weapons against anyone." "I wasn't there," Thomas said quietly. "I never hurt your people. This is my wife Sarah, our daughter Mary. We're farmers from Missouri looking for land to build a home, nothing more." "All whites are same," Little Bear repeated, but the words sounded less certain now. Sarah stepped forward despite Running Wolf's warning gesture. "I lost my father to a fever when I was 14, she said, her voice steady though her heart hammered. "I know what it means to lose someone you love, but killing us won't bring Dancing Doe back. It will only create more orphans, more widows, more grief." The plateau fell silent except for the evening wind through the pines. The warriors shifted restlessly, caught between their loyalty to Little Bear and their growing uncertainty about the justice of their cause. These whites seemed different somehow, not the arrogant, land-hungry settlers they'd expected to find. Little Bear's hand trembled on his knife as he stared at Sarah holding her baby. For just a moment, Sarah saw past his war paint to the broken boy beneath, a child who'd lost everything and didn't know how to stop the pain except through violence. The choice that would determine all their fates hung in the balance like an arrow nocked but not yet released. The silence stretched like a bowstring about to snap. Little Bear's young face was a battlefield of emotions, grief, rage, and growing uncertainty warring beneath the war paint. His warriors watched him carefully, waiting for the signal that would unleash violence or somehow find another path. Mary chose that moment to wake from her exhausted sleep, her tiny cry piercing the tension. Sarah instinctively rocked her daughter, humming a soft lullaby that drifted across the plateau like a prayer. The sound seemed to reach something deep inside Little Bear, and his hand fell away from his knife. "Dancing Doe sang to our child," he whispered in English, his voice breaking. "Before the soldiers came, she sang like that." Running Wolf stepped closer to his brother, moving slowly as if approaching a wounded animal. "She would not want this, Little Bear. You know this in your heart. Dancing Doe had mercy even for enemies. Remember when she tended the wounded cavalry scout we found by Willow Creek? That was before—" Little Bear's voice rose desperately. "Before they killed her, before they burned everything." "And if you kill these innocents," Running Wolf said gently, "will Dancing Doe's spirit rest easier? Or will you carry their blood along with your grief for the rest of your days?" Thomas struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but standing firm. "Boy!" he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd lived through loss. "I was at Gettysburg, saw friends die by the hundreds, felt hatred so deep it nearly ate me alive." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I learned something in all that killing. Revenge is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die." Little Bear stared at him, confusion replacing certainty in his dark eyes. "Your people will never leave us in peace. More soldiers will come, more settlers, until nothing remains of the Lakota." "Maybe," Thomas admitted honestly, "but that's not for us to decide today. Today you have a choice. You can add to the killing, or you can choose something different, something better." Greyhawk, who had remained silent through the confrontation, finally spoke. "The white man speaks wisdom, Little Bear. I fought beside your brother at Sand Creek, saw him save 3 children from the cavalry charge. His honor has never been questioned until today." "Because he protects our enemies," Little Bear shot back, but the fire was going out of his words. "Because he protects the innocent," Greyhawk corrected firmly, "as any warrior of honor should." Sarah made a decision that would either save them all or doom them. She walked forward, carrying Mary, until she stood directly in front of Little Bear. The young warrior tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon, but Sarah's calm courage held him frozen. "Look at her," Sarah said softly, holding Mary up so Little Bear could see the baby's face. "She's never hurt anyone. Never will, if you let her live to grow up in peace. But if you kill her, what becomes of you? What becomes of the man Dancing Doe loved?" Little Bear's breathing became ragged as he stared at the innocent face. Mary gazed back with the fearless curiosity of infancy, her tiny hand reaching toward the painted warrior. Before anyone could stop her, she touched his cheek, leaving a small handprint on the war paint. The touch seemed to break something inside Little Bear. He sank to his knees, all the rage and grief and confusion pouring out in great shuddering sobs. The other warriors watched in stunned silence as their young leader wept like the boy he still was beneath the warrior's facade. Running Wolf knelt beside his brother, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "The pain will never leave completely," he said quietly in Lakota, "but it will change from a poison that destroys to a memory that honors what we've lost." For long minutes, only Little Bear's weeping and the evening wind through the pines broke the silence. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear for the first time since Dancing Doe's death. "I cannot forget," he said in English, speaking directly to Sarah, "but I can choose not to become the thing that killed her." "That's all any of us can do," Sarah replied, her own eyes bright with tears. "Choose to be better than our pain." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the warriors began their descent down the treacherous trail. Greyhawk paused at the plateau's edge, looking back at Running Wolf. "You are welcome in our lodges when you are ready, cousin," he said formally. "Your honor is restored." But Running Wolf shook his head. "My path lies elsewhere now. I will see these people safely to Fort Collins, then find my own way." Little Bear was the last to go. He stood before his brother for a long moment, then spoke words that carried the weight of forgiveness and new understanding. "You chose the harder path, brother, the path of mercy over vengeance. I think Dancing Doe would be proud." After the warriors disappeared into the darkness, Sarah and Thomas sat by the small fire Running Wolf had built. Mary slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that her innocent touch had helped prevent a massacre. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked Running Wolf, who sat apart, staring up at the stars. "I am caught between 2 worlds," he replied honestly. "No longer fully Lakota, never to be white. But perhaps there is honor in building bridges instead of burning them." Thomas struggled to sit up straighter. "Come with us to Fort Collins. Hell, come all the way to Oregon if you want. There's room in this country for men of good conscience, whatever color their skin." Running Wolf considered this for a long moment. "Your people will not welcome one they see as enemy." "Then we'll teach them what we learned today," Sarah said firmly. "That enemies can become friends when we choose to see each other as human beings first." As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the unlikely companions prepared to continue their journey. They carried with them more than just the hope of survival. They carried the proof that understanding could triumph over hatred, that mercy could break the endless cycle of vengeance that had stained the frontier with too much blood. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, it led toward something better than war.